Well, the month of March marks Human Rights Month here in South Africa. Human Rights Day on the 21st of March is a public holiday in the country and is declared International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination by the UN. For many South Africans, the day is still synonymous with the township of Sharpeville, where police on March 21st, 1961, shot dead 69 unarmed people who refused to carry the hated dompas identity document that was meant only for indigenous Africans. This year, the day coincides with the 20th anniversary of the signing of the final draft of the Constitution into law and the 60th anniversary of the 1956 Women's March to the Union buildings. 55 years on after Sharpeville, racism, poverty, a widening inequality gap and a crackdown on human rights activists in some parts of the continent continue to hamper a consolidation of a strong human rights culture. But what are some of the key challenges to consolidating such a human rights culture on the continent? For more, we have Mr. Mandeep Tiwana. He's the head of policy and research at Civicus World Alliance for Citizen Participation, and he joins us now. Good afternoon, Mandeep. Always a pleasure having you on the SABC News Desk.
Thank you for inviting me, Krishna.
Mandeep, racism and prejudice, a human rights issue that affects us all. Should there not be a specific law by the state that criminalizes such racism or any act that perpetuates racism or glorifies apartheid?
Proceeding to legislative processes, it's good to have a public debate. And I'm very happy that there's a good, robust public debate happening in South Africa on this very protracted issue. And I think for the public to consider in this issue is the constitutional freedom of speech and expression with the societal interest in making sure that nobody is indulging in hate speech, nobody is indulging in speech that prejudices other people, and nobody is indulging in speech that incites others to commit violence against certain segments of society.
Mandeep, Oliver Tambo once said, and interestingly enough, he said this back in 1961, the year of the Sharpeville massacre, that the demon of racism must be uprooted in its totality as it brutalizes entire peoples. But 56 years on after Sharpeville, we remain one of the most unequal societies in the country. We have the highest inequity indices in the world. The reality is that income, resources, opportunities are still concentrated within one segment of the population. The reality is that the white community in South Africa still enjoys generational wealth, social capital for that matter. How do we best begin to nurture and sustain or consolidate a human rights culture, a strong one at that, where there's such a widening chasm between the haves and the have-nots?
South Africa, of course, has a very unique and sad history. And, you know, several compromises were made in the transition to democratic rule. And of course, we are having to deal with several of those historical issues at the moment. I think for any constitutional democracy, you know, efforts have to be made by the state to ensure that wealth, income, resources in a country are co-owned by the people. That people have equal access to resources and opportunities. Therefore, the state has a very important role in ensuring economic transformation and in ensuring that certain small minorities don't have access to large bits of public wealth, whether it's land or buildings or, you know, real estate or so on, or the wealth that is below the earth.
Mandeep, let's internationalize this a little bit. What sort of global trends are we seeing when it comes to the key challenges to consolidating human rights on the continent? The first anniversary of the detention of the Congolese youth activists Fred Wama and Eve Makwambala, a case in point, if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Angola is a situation where you have a leader who's been there for decades. You have a totalitarian government that has access to a huge amount of resources, but the people of the country are not benefiting from those resources. And those that are demanding democratic rights, those that are demanding an equitable share of the population, these resources, are being persecuted. So that is indicative of what is also happening in several parts of the continent. We have authoritarian leaders, we have authoritarian political parties that are manipulating elections and staying on in power and persecuting those who demand democratic rights. The second thing I wanted to raise is we are seeing increasing collusion between political and economic elites who are rigging the rules of the game. So these people are basically making sure that economic policies, public services are are in a way manipulated to serve their own interests rather than the public's interests. This is exacerbating inequality and reducing the fight against poverty.
Mandeep, I quickly want to touch on the role of women when it comes to their role as human rights defenders or activists on the continent. What are some of the challenges they face and how restricting is the space that they're working in? How restricting has it become?
You know, almost 70 years after the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there is not gender equality has not been achieved. In almost every country of the world, we find that women are paid less for the work they do. We find that women are more vulnerable to violence. Women have there's a glass ceiling. Women are not able to achieve, jobs in accordance with their true potential in several sectors of society. And women human rights defenders face these exacerbated challenges because they fight against these institutional discrimination of women in the public discourse. Many of them are subjected to sexual violence. Many of them are threatened with their families being harmed because women are oftentimes primary caregivers in many societies. Oftentimes, women are subjected to vilification, stigmatization based on gender, because in patriarchal societies, it's always the women who have to be protective of their sexuality and so on. And so these are particular challenges that women human rights defenders are facing, and it's very unfortunate that so far we've not been able to achieve much progress on this.
Very quickly, bringing it back home, there was a great deal of expectation on post-South Africa, post-apartheid South Africa, to be a vociferous leader in the civil rights arena in terms of its foreign policy. Is it an expectation that we're adequately meeting at this point, Mandeep? There have been certain incidents like the Andries Tatane case, Marikana, that has muddied our image to some extent.
There was a lot of expectation on South Africa, and you're absolutely right. You know, South Africa itself, the movement, benefited a lot from international solidarity. And South Africa is a proud democracy. It's a proud democracy of the global South, and it needs to be doing much more. You know, issues like Syria, which are very difficult to resolve. There's conflict in South Sudan. There's conflict in Sudan. There's other conflicts that are happening across the continent. South Africa should be playing a more important, a bigger role in seeking democratic rights, seeking human rights, seeking social justice, and it should be a leader in some of these affairs, whether at UN forums and other places. But unfortunately, this is not happening as much as the expectation of many of us in civil society is on South Africa.
Thank you, Mandeep, for your time on the SABC News Desk. Mandeep Tiwana is the Head of Policy and Research at Civicus.